Moritz Cornelis Escher, the 17th of June 1898 to 27 March 1972, was a Dutch graphic artist who made mathematically inspired woodcuts, lithographs, and mezzotints. Early in his career he drew inspiration from nature, making studies of insects, landscapes, and plants such as lichens, all of which he reused as details in his artworks. He traveled in Italy and Spain, sketching buildings, townscapes, architecture and the tilings of the Alhambra and La Mezquita, Córdoba, and became steadily more interested in their mathematical structure. His work features mathematical objects and operations including impossible objects, explorations of infinity, reflection, symmetry, perspective, truncated and stellated polyhedra, hyperbolic geometry, and tessellations. Although Escher considered that he had no mathematical ability, he both interacted with the practicing mathematicians George Polya, Roger Penrose, and Harold Coxeter, read mathematical papers by these authors and by the crystallographer Friedrich Hark, and conducted his own mathematical research into tessellation. Escher's art became popular, both among scientists and mathematicians, and in popular culture. Apart from being used in a variety of technical papers, his work has appeared on the covers of many books and albums. He featured as one of the major inspirations of Douglas Hofstadter's 1979 book Gödel, Escher, Bach. Early life. Moritz Cornelis Escher was born on 17 June 1898 in Leeuwarden, Friesland, in a house that forms part of the Prinsenhof Ceramics Museum today. He was the youngest son of civil engineer George Arnold Escher and his second wife, Sarah Gleitman. In 1903, the family moved to Arnhem, where he attended primary and secondary school until 1918. Although he excelled at drawing, his grades were generally poor. He also took carpentry and piano lessons until he was 13 years old. In 1918, he went to the Technical College of Delft. From 1919 to 1922, Escher attended the Haarlem School of Architecture and Decorative Arts, learning drawing and the art of making woodcuts. He briefly studied architecture, but he failed a number of subjects and switched to decorative arts, studying under the graphic artist Samuel Gesseroon de Mesquita. Study journeys. In 1922, an important year of his life, Escher traveled through Italy, visiting Florence, San Gimignano, Volterra, Siena, Ravello. In the same year he traveled through Spain, visiting Madrid, Toledo, and Granada. He was impressed by the Italian countryside, and in Granada by the Moorish architecture of the 14th century Alhambra. The intricate decorative designs of the Alhambra, based on geometrical symmetries featuring interlocking repetitive patterns in the colored tiles or sculpted into the walls and ceilings, triggered his interest in the mathematics of tessellation, and became a powerful influence on his work. Escher returned to Italy, and lived in Rome from 1923 to 1935. While in Italy, Escher met Jetta Irumica, whom he married in 1924. The couple settled in Rome where their first son, Giorgio Arnaldo Escher, named after his grandfather, was born. Escher and Jetta later had two more sons, Arthur and Jan. He traveled frequently, visiting Viterbo in 1926, the Abruzzi in 1927 and 1929, Corsica in 1928 and 1933, Calabria in 1930, the Amalfi Coast in 1931 and 1934, Gargano and Sicily in 1932 and 1935. The townscapes and landscapes of these places feature prominently in his artworks. In May and June 1936, Escher traveled back to Spain, revisiting the Alhambra and spending days at a time making detailed drawings of its mosaic patterns. It was here that he became fascinated to the point of obsession with tessellation, explaining, "It remains an extremely absorbing activity, a real mania to which I have become addicted, and from which I sometimes find it hard to tear myself away." The sketches he made in the Alhambra formed a major source for his work from that time on. He also studied the architecture of the Mezquita, the Moorish Mosque of Córdoba. This turned out to be the last of his long study journeys. After 1937, his artworks were created in his studio rather than in the field. His art correspondingly changed sharply from being mainly observational, with a strong emphasis on the realistic details of things seen in nature and architecture, to being the products of his geometric analysis and his visual imagination. All the same, even his early work already shows his interest in the nature of space, the unusual, perspective, and multiple points of view. Later life. In 1935, the political climate in Italy became unacceptable to Escher. He had no interest in politics, finding it impossible to involve himself with any ideals other than the expressions of his own concepts through his own particular medium. But he was averse to fanaticism and hypocrisy. When his eldest son, George, was forced at the age of 9 to wear a balala uniform in school, the family left Italy and moved to Château d'Aux, Switzerland, where they remained for 2 years. Escher, who had been very fond of and inspired by the landscapes in Italy, was decidedly unhappy in Switzerland. In 1937, the family moved again to Uccle, a suburb of Brussels, Belgium. World War II forced him to move in January 1941, this time to Bern, Netherlands, where Escher lived until 1970. Most of Escher's best-known works date from this period. The sometimes cloudy, cold and wet weather of the Netherlands allowed him to focus intently on his work. After 1953, Escher lectured widely. A planned series of lectures in North America in 1962 was cancelled after an illness, and he stopped creating artworks for a time. But the illustrations and texts for the lectures were later published as part of the book Escher on Escher. In July 1969 he finished his last work, a large woodcut with threefold rotational symmetry called Snakes, in which snakes wind through a pattern of linked rings. These shrink to infinity toward both the center and the edge of a circle. It was exceptionally elaborate, being printed using 3 blocks, each rotated 3 times about the center of the image and precisely aligned to avoid gaps and overlaps, for a total of 9 print operations for each finished print. The image encapsulates Escher's love of symmetry, of interlocking patterns, and at the end of his life, of his approach to infinity. The care Escher took in creating and printing this woodcut can be seen in a video recording. Escher moved to the Roserspeer in Laren in 1970, an artist's retirement home in which he had his own studio. He died there on the 27th of March 1972, aged 73. He is buried at the New Cemetery in Bern. Mathematically inspired work. Escher's work is inescapably mathematical. This has caused a disconnect between his full-on popular fame and the reserve or lack of esteem with which he has been viewed in the art world. His originality and mastery of graphic techniques is respected, but his works have been thought too intellectual and insufficiently lyrical. The advent of movements such as conceptual art has to a degree reversed the art world's attitude to the intellectual and the lyrical in art. But this did not rehabilitate Escher because traditional critics still disliked his narrative themes and his use of perspective. However, these same qualities made his work highly attractive to the public. Escher is not the first artist to explore mathematical themes. Parmigianino had explored spherical geometry and reflection in his 1524 self-portrait in a convex mirror, depicting his own image in a curved mirror, while William Hogarth's 1754 satire on false perspective foreshadows Escher's playful exploration of errors in perspective. Another early artistic forerunner is Giovanni Battista Piranesi, whose dark, fantastical prints such as the drawbridge in his Carceri sequence depict perspectives into complex architecture with many stairs and ramps, peopled by walking figures. Only with 20th-century movements such as Cubism, vestigial Dadaism and Surrealism did mainstream art start to explore Escher-like ways of looking at the world with multiple simultaneous viewpoints. However, while Escher had much in common with, for example, Magritte's Surrealism, he did not make contact with any of these movements. Forerunner of Escher's curved perspectives, geometries, and reflections. Parmigianino's Self-Portrait in a Convex Mirror, 1524. Forerunner of Escher's fantastic Endless Stairs. Piranesi's Carcery, Plate 7, The Drawbridge, 1745, reworked 1761. Tessellation. In his early years, Escher sketched landscapes and nature. He also sketched insects such as ants, bees, grasshoppers and mantises, which appeared frequently in his later work. His early love of Roman and Italian landscapes and of nature created an interest in tessellation, which he called regular division of the plane. This became the title of his 1958 book, complete with reproductions of a series of woodcuts based on tessellations of the plane, in which he described the systematic build-up of mathematical designs in his artworks. He wrote, "Mathematicians have opened the gate leading to an extensive domain," after his 1936 journey to the Alhambra and to La Mezquita, Córdoba, where he sketched the Moorish architecture and the tessellated mosaic decorations. Escher began to explore the properties and possibilities of tessellation using geometric grids as the basis for his sketches. He then extended these to form complex interlocking designs, for example with animals such as birds, fish, and reptiles. One of his first attempts at a tessellation was his pencil, India ink and watercolor study of regular division of the plane with reptiles, constructed on a hexagonal grid. The heads of the red, green and white reptiles meet at a vertex. The tails, legs and sides of the animals exactly interlock. It was used as the basis for his 1943 lithograph Reptiles. His first study of mathematics began with papers by George Polya and by the crystallographer Friedrich Haack on plane symmetry groups, sent to him by his brother Berend. He carefully studied the 17 wallpaper groups, and created periodic tilings with 43 drawings of different types of symmetry. From this point on he developed a mathematical approach to expressions of symmetry in his artworks using his own notation. Starting in 1937, he created woodcuts based on the 17 groups. His Metamorphosis I began a series of designs that told a story through the use of pictures. In Metamorphosis I, he transformed convex polygons into regular patterns in a plane to form a human motif. He extended the approach in his piece Metamorphosis III, which is 4 meters long. In 1941 and 1942, Escher summarized his findings for his own artistic use in a sketchbook, which he labeled Regelmäßige Verdelung in asymmetrische Kongruintervalhöhen. The mathematician Doris Schatz-Schneider unequivocally described this notebook as recording a methodical investigation that can only be termed mathematical research. She defined the research questions he was following as: what are the possible shapes for a tile that can produce a regular division of the plane? That is, a tile that can fill the plane with its congruent images such that every tile is surrounded in the same manner. Moreover, in what ways are the edges of such a tile related to each other by isometries, geometries? Although Escher did not have mathematical training, his understanding of mathematics was largely visual and intuitive. His art had a strong mathematical component, and several of the worlds which he drew were built around impossible objects. After 1924, Escher turned to sketching landscapes in Italy and Corsica with irregular perspectives that are impossible in natural form. His first print of an impossible reality was Still Life and Street. Impossible stairs and multiple visual and gravitational perspectives feature in popular works such as Relativity. House of Stairs attracted the interest of the mathematician Roger Penrose and his father, the biologist Lionel Penrose. In 1956, they published a paper, Impossible Objects, a special type of visual illusion, and later sent Escher a copy. Escher replied, admiring the pen rows are continuously rising flights of steps, and enclosed a print of ascending and descending. The paper also contained the Triber or Penrose triangle, which Escher used repeatedly in his lithograph of a building that appears to function as a perpetual motion machine, Waterfall. Escher was interested enough in Hieronymus Bosch's 1500 triptych The Garden of Earthly Delights to recreate part of its right-hand panel, Hell, as a lithograph in 1935. He reused the figure of a medieval woman in a two-pointed headdress and a long gown in his lithograph Belvedere in 1958. The image is, like many of his other extraordinary invented places, peopled with jesters, knaves and contemplators. Escher was thus not only interested in possible or impossible geometry, but was, in his own words, a reality enthusiast. He combined formal astonishment with a vivid and idiosyncratic vision. Escher worked primarily in the media of lithographs and woodcuts, though the few mezzotints he made are considered to be masterpieces of the technique. In his graphic art, he portrayed mathematical relationships among shapes, figures and space. Integrated into his prints were mirror images of cones, spheres, cubes, rings and spirals. Escher was also fascinated by mathematical objects like the Mobius Strip, which has only one surface. His wood engraving Mobius Strip 2 depicts a chain of ants marching forever around over what at any one place are the two opposite faces of the object, which are seen on inspection to be parts of the strip's single surface. In Escher's own words, an endless ring-shaped band usually has two distinct surfaces, one inside and one outside. Yet on this strip 9 red ants crawl after each other and travel the front side as well as the reverse side. Therefore the strip has only one surface. The mathematical influence in his work became prominent after 1936, when, having boldly asked the Adria Shipping Company if he could sail with them as traveling artist in return for making drawings of their ships, they surprisingly agreed, and he sailed the Mediterranean, becoming interested in order and symmetry. Escher described this journey, including his repeat visit to the Alhambra, as the richest source of inspiration I have ever tapped. Escher's interesting curvilinear perspective was encouraged by his friend and kindred spirit, the art historian and artist Albert Flocan. In another example of constructive mutual influence, Flocan identified Escher as a thinking artist, alongside Piero della Francesca, Leonardo da Vinci, Albrecht Dürer, Wenzel Jametzer, Abraham Boss, Gerard Desargues, and Per Nicken. Flocan was delighted by Escher's Graphic Entdeckungen, which he read in 1959. This stimulated Flocan and André Bar to correspond with Escher, and to write the book La Perspective Curviline. Platonic and other solids. Escher often incorporated three-dimensional objects such as the Platonic solids such as spheres, tetrahedrons and cubes into his works, as well as mathematical objects like cylinders and stellated polyhedra. In the print Reptiles, he combined two- and three-dimensional images. In one of his papers, Escher emphasized the importance of dimensionality. The flat shape irritates me. I feel like telling my objects, you are too fictitious, lying there next to each other, static and frozen. Do something, come off the paper and show me what you are capable of. So I make them come out of the plane. My objects may finally return to the plane and disappear into their place of origin. Escher's artwork is especially well liked by mathematicians like Doris Schatzschneider and scientists like Roger Penrose, who enjoy his use of polyhedra and geometric distortions. For example, in gravitation, animals climb around a stellated dodecahedron. The two towers of Waterfall's impossible building are topped with compound polyhedra, one a compound of 3 cubes. The other a stellated rhombic dodecahedron known as Escher's solid. Escher had used this solid in his 1948 woodcut Stars, which also contains all 5 of the Platonic solids and various stellated solids. Representing stars, the central solid is animated by chameleons climbing through the frame as it whirls in space. Escher possessed a 6 cm refracting telescope and was a keen enough amateur astronomer to have recorded observations of binary stars. Levels of reality. Escher's artistic expression was created from images in his mind, rather than directly from observations and travels to other countries. His interest in the multiple levels of reality in art is seen in works such as Drawing Hands, where 2 hands are shown, each drawing the other. The critic Stephen Poole commented that it is a neat depiction of one of Escher's enduring fascinations. The contrast between the two-dimensional flatness of a sheet of paper and the illusion of three-dimensional volume that can be created with certain marks. In Drawing Hands, space and the flat plane coexist, each born from and returning to the other. The black magic of the artistic illusion made creepily manifest. Infinity and hyperbolic geometry. In 1954, the International Congress of Mathematicians met in Amsterdam, and N.G. de Bruin organized a display of Escher's work at the Stedelijk Museum for the participants. Both Roger Penrose and H.S.M. Coxeter were deeply impressed with Escher's intuitive grasp of mathematics. Inspired by relativity, Penrose devised his triber, and his father, Lionel Penrose, devised an endless staircase. Roger Penrose sent sketches of both objects to Escher, and the cycle of invention was closed when Escher then created the perpetual motion machine of waterfall and the endless march of the monk figures of ascending and descending. In 1957, Coxeter obtained Escher's permission to use 2 of his drawings in his paper, Crystal Symmetry and its Generalizations. He sent Escher a copy of the paper. Escher recorded that Coxeter's figure of a hyperbolic tessellation gave me quite a shock. The infinite regular repetition of the tiles in the hyperbolic plane, growing rapidly smaller towards the edge of the circle, was precisely what he wanted to allow him to represent infinity on a two-dimensional plane. Escher carefully studied Coxeter's figure, marking it up to analyze the successively smaller circles with which it had been constructed. He then constructed a diagram, which he sent to Coxeter, showing his analysis. Coxeter confirmed it was correct, but disappointed Escher with his highly technical reply. All the same, Escher persisted with hyperbolic tiling, which he called Coxetering. Among the results were the series of wood engravings Circle Limit IIV. In 1959, Coxeter published his finding that these works were extraordinarily accurate. Escher got it absolutely right to the millimeter. Honors and distinctions. Escher was awarded the knighthood of the Order of Orange-Nassau in 1955.